He spent years erasing himself from the world. No past, no headlines, no second chances. But when a desperate woman knocked on his door in the middle of the night, injured, terrified, and carrying a secret powerful men would kill for, he was forced to choose between staying invisible or becoming the man he promised himself he'd never be again. Because this time, failure wouldn't just cost him his life, it would cost hers too. Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional stories about hidden heroes, unexpected love, and lives colliding in the darkest moments, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let me tell you how one quiet night changed everything. Jonah Reed had mastered the art of being forgettable. In a small coastal town where tourists came and went like tides, Jonah ran a repair shop that fixed boats no one cared about anymore. Old engines, rusted hulls, things people had abandoned when they outgrew them. It suited him. Broken things didn't ask questions. He lived alone above the shop, waking before sunrise, closing after dark, speaking only when necessary. To the town, Jonah was quiet, polite, unremarkable. That was the point. At 11:47 p.m., the knock came. 3 sharp raps on his apartment door. Jonah froze. Nobody knocked this late. Nobody knocked at all. His hand moved instinctively, not toward fear, but toward memory, toward reflexes buried under years of pretending to be ordinary. He stepped quietly to the door, listening. A woman's voice, barely audible. "Please, I know you're in there." His breath slowed. He opened the door halfway. The woman standing there looked like she'd run through hell to get here. Her dark hair was tangled, one side of her face smeared with blood, her coat torn at the shoulder. But her eyes, sharp, intelligent, burning with urgency, locked onto his like she'd found the only lifeline left in the world. "My name is Claire Donovan," she said, voice shaking but controlled. "And if you don't help me right now, I won't survive the night." Jonah scanned the street behind her. Empty, too empty. "What happened?" he asked. Her jaw tightened. "Then go to the police." She shook her head slowly. "They own half of them." That sentence landed heavier than the blood on her coat. Jonah stepped back, opening the door wider. "Get inside." The moment she crossed the threshold, headlights swept across the street below. Claire flinched, grabbing his arm with trembling fingers. "They're here." Jonah closed the door calmly, locking it with a soft click. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. The man who fixed engines disappeared, and the man who once knew how to disappear others woke up. Claire Donovan sat at the small wooden table in Jonah Reed's kitchen, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug she hadn't touched. Steam curled upward, forgotten. Her eyes stayed fixed on the window, tracking every passing shadow like it might suddenly turn into a threat. Jonah stood a few feet away, quiet as stone, watching her without staring. He'd wrapped a clean towel around her bleeding cheek and handed her water she drank in careful sips, as if wasting time might get her killed. "You want to tell me why armed men are cruising my street?" he asked calmly. Claire swallowed. "Because I made a mistake." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "Most mistakes don't come with headlights and engines idling." She gave a weak, humorless smile. "I work for a logistics intelligence firm. On paper, we optimize shipping routes. Off the books, we track everything: people, cargo, Data. Jonah leaned against the counter, arms folded. And you found something? I found a private pipeline, weapons moving under humanitarian labels, entire shipments disappearing, and the names attached to them weren't criminals. They were politicians, contractors, men with flags on their desks. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. When I tried to raise concerns internally, my access was cut, my phone started glitching, my apartment was searched while I was at work. She laughed once, bitter. They wanted me scared enough to shut up. Didn't work, Jonah said. No, she replied softly. So I copied everything, every file, every route, every name. Jonah's gaze sharpened. Where is it? Claire hesitated, then reached into her torn coat and pulled out a small black data drive no bigger than a key. She placed it on the table like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This, she said, is why I won't survive the night if I leave. Jonah stared at the drive. He didn't touch it. Instead, he walked to the window and looked down at the street. The headlights were gone now, but the silence felt staged, like predators waiting for movement. How did you find me? He asked. Claire's voice dropped. I didn't. My car rerouted itself. Navigation glitched and took me straight to your shop. Jonah turned slowly. That's not an accident, he said. Claire met his eyes. I was hoping you'd say that. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind rattled the window panes. Somewhere below, a dog barked once and went silent. Jonah picked up the data drive, weighing it in his palm. You have any idea who you just dragged into this? Claire's eyes softened, not with fear, but something like apology. No, but I know you're not just a repairman. Jonah's lips pressed into a thin line. Before he could respond, a distant sound cut through the quiet. A car door closing. Jonah went still. Claire's breath caught. That's them. Jonah moved fast. He crossed the room, turned off the lights, and gestured for her to follow him toward the back stairwell. Stay close, he said. What are you going to do? Jonah didn't answer right away. He opened a hidden compartment beneath the stairs, revealing items he hadn't touched in years, gear wrapped in oilcloth, carefully preserved like a past he'd buried but never destroyed. He looked at Claire, eyes cold and focused now. I'm going to make sure, he said, that knocking on my door was the worst decision they ever made. Claire realized then that she hadn't run into just another stranger. She had run into a man who knew exactly how to end a hunt. The headlights didn't move. They stayed parked at the far end of the street, engine humming low, patient. The kind of patience that didn't belong to neighbors or lost tourists. Jonah Reed had seen it before, years ago, in places where people vanished quietly and questions were buried with them. He pulled the curtain back just enough to see the outline of the vehicle. Black, unmarked, too clean. 2 of them, he said under his breath. Claire stood behind him, her arms wrapped around herself. They usually send more. Jonah glanced at her. Then they're still trying to scare you. A pause. And if that doesn't work? He asked. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. They escalate. Jonah nodded once, already moving. He shut the curtain and gestured toward the back stairwell. We're leaving, not through the front. She hesitated. Where will we go? Somewhere they won't expect, and somewhere I control. As they descended the narrow stairs, the sound of footsteps echoed from below, slow, deliberate. Jonah stopped instantly, one hand lifting to signal Claire to freeze. A knock hit the front door downstairs. Firm, confident, not a question. Jonah felt the familiar shift inside him, the calm that only came when danger stopped being theoretical. He leaned closer to Claire, his voice barely audible. "Whatever happens, you stay behind me." Another knock, louder. "Mr. Reed?" a man's voice called out, smooth and practiced. "We just want to talk." Claire's breath stuttered. Jonah didn't respond. The door handle rattled. "We know you're home. We're not here to make trouble." Jonah almost smiled. He moved silently to the side wall and pressed a hidden latch. A narrow service passage slid open, an old access route from when the building was first constructed, long before anyone thought about security cameras or digital footprints. "Go," he whispered. Claire slipped inside, eyes wide. Jonah followed just as the front door downstairs cracked open with the sound of splintering wood. The men moved fast. Jonah heard boots on stairs. A flashlight beam sliced through the dark above them. "Check the apartment," someone shouted. Jonah pulled Claire into the passage and slid the panel shut behind them. Darkness swallowed them whole, broken only by Claire's shallow breathing. They waited. Footsteps thundered overhead. Furniture scraped. A drawer slammed. "Clear," a voice said. "She's gone." Jonah exhaled slowly. The passage led out behind the building, opening onto a narrow alley that smelled of salt and old wood. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp. They stepped out just as voices rose behind them in frustration. "She was here!" Jonah didn't run. He walked fast and steady, guiding Claire toward the shadows between buildings, never looking back. "You planned that," Claire whispered. Jonah didn't deny it. "I planned for trouble, didn't know what shape it would take." They reached the corner where the alley met the docks. Moonlight reflected off dark water, boats rocking gently against their moorings. Jonah scanned the area once, then headed toward a small trawler tied at the far end. "Please tell me that's yours," Claire said. "It is," Jonah replied, "and it doesn't exist on any registry that matters." They climbed aboard. Jonah untied the rope with practiced ease and started the engine. It coughed once, then settled into a quiet, steady hum. As the boat drifted away from the dock, headlights flared behind them. One of the men had reached the alley exit. A beam swept across the water, stopping just short of the trawler as Jonah cut the lights and guided them into the deeper darkness. Claire sank onto the bench, her legs giving out. She looked up at Jonah, eyes glassy with adrenaline and disbelief. "You didn't hesitate when they came," she said. Jonah kept his eyes on the water. "Hesitation gets people killed." She studied him for a long moment. "You've done this before." He didn't answer. The boat slipped into the fog rolling in from the sea, swallowing them completely. The town faded behind them, lights blinking out one by one, until there was nothing but black water and the sound of their breathing. Claire finally broke the silence. "Why are you helping me?" she quietly asked. Jonah slowed the engine, letting the boat drift. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Because," he said, "once men like that start knocking on doors, they don't stop, and I don't let them decide who lives." Claire nodded slowly. For the first time since she'd knocked on Jonah's door, she felt something unfamiliar settle into her chest. Not safety, but a fighting chance. The trawler cut through the fog like it belonged there, engine low and steady, leaving only a soft ripple behind it. Jonah didn't speak as he guided them away from the docks. His eyes stayed forward, scanning the water and the dark shoreline with the same focus he'd used in the alley. Claire sat wrapped in an old canvas jacket he'd handed her, the smell of salt and oil clinging to it. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but her mind hadn't. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow felt like it could move. After nearly 20 minutes, Jonah eased the boat toward a narrow inlet hidden between jagged rocks. The fog thinned just enough to reveal a small, weather-beaten cabin tucked against the shoreline, half swallowed by pine trees. Claire frowned. "Is this yours?" Jonah cut the engine. "It is." She looked at him. "Does anyone know about it?" "No." That answer carried weight. They stepped off the boat and climbed a short path toward the cabin. Jonah unlocked the door and motioned for her to go inside first. The place was simple: wooden walls, a small table, a couch that had seen better days, and shelves lined with supplies that suggested preparation, not comfort. Claire glanced around. "You planned to disappear here." Jonah set his keys down. "I planned to survive here." He turned on a small lamp. Warm light filled the room, chasing away the shadows. For the first time since this nightmare began, Claire felt the tension in her shoulders loosen just a fraction. Jonah moved methodically, checking windows, locking doors, pulling a curtain tight. When he finished, he leaned against the counter and finally looked at her fully. "You hurt?" he asked. She touched her cheek where the dried blood had been. "I've had worse." He nodded, then reached into a cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit. He didn't ask permission, just stepped closer and began cleaning the cut with careful hands. His touch was firm but gentle, like he knew exactly how much pressure not to use. Claire watched him quietly. "You're not just hiding from something, you're hiding from yourself." Jonah didn't look up. "That's not your concern." She winced as he dabbed the wound. "I dragged you into this. It kind of is." He paused, then met her eyes. Something flickered there. Old anger, older regret. "I left a life behind because people got hurt. I don't let strangers walk into my door. Yet here I am." "Yes," Jonah said quietly. "Here you are." The silence stretched, thick but not uncomfortable. Claire exhaled slowly. "The men after me, they won't stop. The data I have could collapse entire networks. That makes me a problem they'll keep solving until I'm gone." Jonah sealed the bandage. "Then we don't let them solve it." She studied his face. "You're serious?" "I don't make jokes about survival." Claire nodded once, then surprised him by saying, "I don't regret knocking on your door." Jonah stepped back. "You might." "Maybe, but for the first time since this started, I don't feel alone." That landed harder than any accusation. Outside, the wind rattled the trees. Somewhere far off, an engine echoed faintly across the water. Jonah's eyes lifted sharply. "They'll widen their search. They always do." Claire straightened. "Then tell me what to do." He held her gaze, measuring her not as a liability, but as someone who might survive this with him. "Get some rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow we plan." Claire nodded and moved toward the couch. As she lay back, exhaustion hit her all at once. Jonah turned off the lamp, leaving only a soft glow near the window. He stood there for a long moment, listening to her breathing even out. He hadn't planned to protect anyone ever again. But now that she was here, he wasn't sure he could stop himself.
Morning came quietly, the kind that felt borrowed rather than earned. Gray light filtered through the thin curtains, washing the cabin in a soft, uncertain calm. Jonah was already awake, sitting at the small table with a mug of black coffee untouched in front of him. He'd slept maybe an hour. Old habits didn't allow more when someone else's life depended on him. Claire stirred on the couch, wincing slightly as she sat up. Her body ached in places adrenaline had hidden the night before. She brushed hair from her face and looked around, momentarily confused, until the memory of headlights, fog, and running snapped back into place. "You didn't leave," she said softly. Jonah glanced up. "Didn't plan to." She pushed herself upright. "You watched all night." It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. "They won't hit at dawn, too obvious, but they'll be listening." Claire wrapped the jacket tighter around herself and moved closer to the table. She hesitated, then sat across from him. The quiet between them felt different now, less sharp, more weighted. "You could still walk away," she said. "Point me in a direction, pretend this never happened." Jonah studied her face. The cut on her cheek had already begun to heal, but the exhaustion behind her eyes hadn't. "If I do that," he said calmly, "they'll catch you before nightfall. And if you stay, they'll come for both of us." Claire nodded slowly. "Then why stay?" Jonah looked down at his hands, strong hands, scarred hands, hands that ended conflicts most people never knew existed. "Because once you let people like that decide outcomes," he said, "they keep deciding." She searched his face. "You talk like this isn't your first time." "It isn't." The silence stretched again, heavier this time. Claire took a breath. "I wasn't always this person, the one who runs. I used to believe systems worked if you pushed hard enough. And now? And now I know systems protect themselves," she said quietly, "even if it means erasing people." Jonah nodded. "That's why I left." Her eyes lifted sharply. "Left what?" He didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the water. The fog had thinned, revealing a pale horizon. "I was good at things that don't belong in peaceful places," he said. "When I realized that skill set never really turns off, I walked away before it destroyed what was left of me." Claire stood and joined him, careful not to crowd him. "You don't look destroyed." He gave a short, humorless smile. "That's because I learned how to disappear." She hesitated, then said something quieter, more honest. "I don't think you disappeared. I think you hid." Jonah turned to her. For the first time, he didn't look guarded. He looked seen. A sudden electronic chirp cut through the moment. Claire stiffened. "That's my phone." Jonah's head snapped toward the sound. "You still have it?" "I turned it off," she said quickly. "Pulled the battery, but—" Another chirp, then another. Jonah reached for it and flipped it open, scanning the screen. They're pinging, probing, not tracking yet. Claire's pulse quickened. "How long until they find us?" Jonah's jaw tightened. "Hours, maybe less." She swallowed. "Then we need to move the data." He met her gaze. That was always the plan. She reached into her bag and pulled out a second drive, identical to the first. "There's more. Backups, encryption keys. If this gets out, it ends them, but I need access to a secure uplink." Jonah nodded slowly. "I know a place." She blinked. "Of course you do." He gave her a look. "You sure you're ready for what comes next?" Claire didn't hesitate. "I didn't survive this long to stop now." Jonah grabbed his jacket. "Then finish your coffee." She smiled faintly. "I don't drink coffee." "Today," he said, already heading for the door, "you do." As they stepped outside together, the calm shattered just enough to remind them it was temporary. And whatever waited next wouldn't let them hide anymore. They left the cabin just after sunrise. Jonah checked the shoreline one last time before pushing the trawler away from the dock. The morning fog had thinned, but the air still felt heavy, like the quiet before something snapped. He kept the engine low, guiding them out through the inlet with practiced ease. Claire sat beside him, jacket zipped up, eyes scanning the water. She looked calmer than she had the night before, but Jonah could tell it wasn't peace.
It was focus, the kind that came when fear finally burned itself into purpose. "You said you know a place," she said. "I do," Jonah replied, "but we can't go straight there." "Because they'll be watching?" "Because they'll assume I'm predictable," he said. "I'm not." They rounded a bend in the coastline when Jonah's posture changed. His hand tightened on the wheel. His eyes narrowed toward the open water behind them. Claire felt it immediately. "What is it?" Jonah didn't answer. He reached down and switched off the engine. The sudden silence was loud. At first, Claire thought it was paranoia, until she heard it too, a distant hum, low, steady, growing. "Another boat?" she asked. Jonah shook his head slowly. Too quiet, too controlled. The sound came again, closer this time. Jonah crouched slightly, scanning the horizon, and then he saw it, a sleek, dark craft cutting cleanly through the water, angling toward them without hesitation. Claire's stomach dropped. "That's not local." "No," Jonah said grimly. "That's them." The dark boat accelerated. Jonah reacted instantly. He restarted the engine and swung the wheel hard, sending the trawler toward a narrow channel between rocks. The sudden turn threw Claire sideways. She grabbed the rail, heart pounding. "They're faster!" she shouted. "Not where we're going." The pursuing boat closed the distance. A figure stood at its bow, raising something metallic that glinted in the sunlight. Gunfire cracked across the water. Claire screamed as a bullet punched through the side of the trawler, spraying wood splinters into the air. Jonah swore under his breath and steered harder, guiding them toward the rocks. Waves slammed against the hull as they entered the narrow channel. The water churned violently, unforgiving to anyone who didn't know its patterns. Another shot rang out, missing them by inches. Claire crouched low. "They're trying to disable us." "I know," Jonah snapped. "Hold on." The channel tightened, jagged rocks rising on either side. Jonah guided the boat with razor focus, memorizing every turn from years ago. The larger craft behind them hesitated, slowing just enough. Jonah saw his opening. He cut the engine suddenly and swung the wheel, letting the trawler drift sharply sideways behind a rock outcrop. The pursuing boat roared past their position, unable to stop in time. Jonah killed the lights. They waited in silence as the dark boat slowed, its engine idling nearby. Voices carried faintly over the water, frustrated, clipped. They vanished. "Scan again." Jonah held his breath. Claire's fingers dug into his arm, shaking. Minutes passed. Finally, the engine revved and the boat turned away, speeding off toward open water. Claire slumped against the seat, breath hitching. That was too close. Jonah didn't relax. "It's getting worse." She looked at him. "Meaning?" He said, "They're done scaring you. They're escalating." They continued in silence until Jonah docked at a small, forgotten marina miles away. He tied the boat quickly and ushered Claire off. "This wasn't the plan," she said. "It is now. We're switching routes." As they moved toward an old warehouse near the docks, Claire slowed. "Jonah, I need to know something." He glanced back. "What?" "If staying with you gets you killed, will you regret it?" Jonah stopped walking. He looked at her, not guarded, not distant, but honest. "No," he said, "I'd regret leaving." The words hung between them, heavier than any promise. Before Claire could respond, a sharp crack echoed from behind them. Jonah shoved her down just as glass shattered up above their heads. "Down!" Jonah shouted. They hit the ground as another shot rang out. Jonah rolled, pulling Claire with him behind a stack of crates. His eyes were sharp now, calculating angles, distances, exits. "Stay here," he ordered. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. He checked the corner, then looked back at her. "End the chase." Claire watched him move, silent, controlled, unstoppable, and understood something terrifying and reassuring all at once. She wasn't being protected by chance. She was being protected by a man who knew exactly what this kind of war looked like, and he had decided to fight it.
Jonah didn't fire back. That was the part that surprised the men watching from the rooftops. He didn't panic. He didn't chase. He didn't shout. He simply disappeared between the stacks of rusted crates like smoke folding into itself. Claire stayed exactly where he told her to, pressed low behind the concrete barrier, heart hammering so loud she was sure it could be heard over the waves. Seconds passed, then minutes. The shooters grew impatient. "Move in," one of them muttered into a radio. That impatience cost them. Jonah struck from the blind side, fast, precise, controlled. One man went down hard before he could even turn. Another spun, weapon half raised, only to be slammed into the dock railing and knocked unconscious. Jonah disarmed the third without breaking stride and shoved him face first onto the concrete. The man groaned. Jonah pressed a boot into his back. "You tell me who sent you," Jonah said calmly. The man laughed weakly. "You really think this ends with us?" Jonah leaned down, voice quiet and lethal. "It ends when I know who I'm dealing with." The man hesitated. Jonah adjusted the pressure just enough. All right. The order came from Mercer Global Logistics." Jonah's eyes flickered. Claire felt it before she heard it, the shift. The name meant something to him. "That's not a security firm," Jonah said. "No, it's a front. Warehousing, shipping, compliance consulting. But the real boss doesn't touch the paper." "Name." The man swallowed. "Elliot Mercer." Jonah froze. That name reached back years, Black Ops briefings, classified whispers spoken only in rooms without windows. Elliot Mercer wasn't a businessman. He was a broker, a man who sold instability to the highest bidder and called it logistics. Jonah stepped back and knocked the man unconscious with a single blow. Claire emerged slowly from cover, eyes searching Jonah's face. "You know him," she said. Jonah nodded once. "I thought he was dead." She frowned. "Who is he?" Jonah looked out over the water, jaw tight. "Someone who makes wars profitable without ever pulling a trigger." Claire's breath caught. "Mercer Global, that's who funded the pipeline I found, the weapons shipments, the falsified humanitarian routes." Jonah turned to her. "Then this isn't about silencing you. What is it about?" "Control, and erasing anyone who proves it exists." Claire pulled the drive from her bag. "Then this is bigger than I thought." He met her gaze, and more dangerous. They moved quickly after that, leaving the docks before reinforcements arrived. Jonah guided them into an abandoned coastal warehouse, long forgotten, half collapsed, invisible to modern tracking systems. Inside, Jonah finally stopped. He pulled an old laptop from a sealed case and powered it up. "What are you doing?" Claire asked. "Confirming." He typed fast, accessed systems Claire didn't recognize. The screen filled with secure channels, redacted names, old operational markers. Then one file opened. Mercer, Elliot, status, active. Jonah exhaled slowly. Claire stared at the screen. "You were part of this world," Jonah said. "I was part of stopping it before politics shut us down." She looked at him differently now, not just as a protector, but as someone deeply entangled in the truth she'd uncovered. "So what happens next?" Claire asked.
Jonah closed the laptop. "Now," he said, "we stop running." Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. But for the first time since Claire knocked on his door, the hunt had a face and a name. The warehouse stayed dark on purpose. Jonah killed the overhead breakers and worked only by the glow of the laptop screen. Dust drifted through thin shafts of daylight, the air heavy with salt and rust. It was the kind of place Mercer's people wouldn't bother scanning. Too old, too broken, too irrelevant. That was exactly why it worked. Claire sat across from Jonah on an overturned crate, her jacket folded neatly beside her. The fear she'd carried for days had sharpened into something colder now, focused, controlled, dangerous in its own way. "You said we stop running," she said. "What does that look like?" Jonah didn't look up. "It looks like this, getting out, in pieces." He pulled up multiple windows on the laptop, secure drop sites, anonymous media channels, watchdog groups, financial crime task forces that still operated outside Mercer's influence. Claire leaned forward. "You're not sending everything at once." "No," Jonah said. "That gets buried, or discredited, or labeled a hoax." He glanced at her. "We expose patterns first. Let them connect the dots themselves." Claire nodded slowly. "Shipping logs." "First," Jonah agreed. "Humanitarian routes rerouted, missing cargo, repeated shell companies." Claire slid the data drive across the crate. "I've mapped all of it. Names change, routes don't." Jonah uploaded the first packet. Somewhere far away, servers spun up. Alerts pinged, red flags tripped quietly inside systems Mercer believed he controlled. Claire felt it, not physically, but emotionally. Something had shifted. "They'll know," she said. "Yes," replied Jonah, "and that's the point." He paused, then added, "But they won't know where." Claire exhaled. "What happens when Mercer realizes this isn't just one leak?" Jonah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "He'll try to control the narrative." As if on cue, Claire's phone vibrated, hard, insistent. She stared at it. "That phone has been dead for 12 hours. Jonah nodded once, which means he's bypassing normal channels. The screen lit up with a single incoming call. Unknown caller. Claire looked at Jonah. "Do I answer?" "Yes," Jonah said, on speaker. She swallowed and tapped the screen. A man's voice filled the warehouse, smooth, calm, practiced. "Claire Donovan? You've made this far more complicated than it needed to be." Claire's spine straightened. "Elliot Mercer." A soft chuckle. "Good. Saves time." Jonah listened without reacting. "You've released partial data, enough to cause noise, not enough to prove intent." "That was intentional," Claire replied. "Of course it was," Mercer said. "You're intelligent. That's why I didn't want you dead." Jonah's eyes hardened. "Then why send men after me?" Claire asked. "Because fear works faster than persuasion," Mercer said lightly. "But you've made yourself inconvenient." Jonah leaned closer to the phone. "You made a mistake." A brief pause. "And who's this?" Mercer asked. Jonah spoke calmly. "Someone who's already beaten you once." Silence stretched. Then Mercer quietly said, "Jonah Reed. I wondered how long it would take before you crawled back out of hiding." Claire's breath caught. "You should have stayed buried. This ends badly for anyone near you." Jonah didn't raise his voice. "You don't scare me." "No," Mercer agreed. "I scare the people around you." The call disconnected. Claire's hands trembled, but only for a second. Then she steadied them. "He's going to retaliate," she said. "Yes," replied Jonah, "publicly." He began uploading the second packet. This one was heavier. Financial records, shell companies, payments routed through charities, politicians' names hidden in accounting codes. Claire watched the progress bar crawl forward. "You're burning his cover," she said. Jonah nodded, and forcing him to move. Sirens echoed faintly outside, far away but real. News alerts began flashing on Claire's phone now, one after another. Investigation launched into Mercer Global Logistics. Anonymous leak questions humanitarian supply chains. Senate aide confirms review of shipping contracts. Claire let out a shaky laugh. "They're biting." Jonah finally allowed himself a breath. Good. But he wasn't smiling. "This is the point of no return," he said. "Once we finish this upload, there's no bargaining, no deals." Claire met his gaze. "I didn't come this far to negotiate." Jonah nodded. He hit send. Somewhere, Elliot Mercer's empire flinched. And for the first time, the man who had hunted in silence was being dragged into the light. The collapse didn't come like an explosion. It came like rot finally exposed to air. Jonah watched the news feed scroll across the laptop screen, each update stacking pressure onto Mercer's network like a tightening vice. What had once been isolated allegations were now being echoed by outlets Mercer didn't control. Investigators spoke carefully, but their language had shifted. Words like review and concern were gone. Now it was subpoena, asset freeze, emergency oversight. Claire stood behind Jonah, arms crossed tightly, her eyes locked on the screen as if she could will the truth to move faster. "They're turning on each other," she said. Jonah nodded. "They always do." Emails leaked next, then internal memos. One whistleblower emboldened another. Executives who had sworn loyalty to Mercer Global began issuing public statements, distancing themselves from unverified practices and unauthorized operations. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This was never just one man. "No," Jonah agreed, "but it only takes one pressure point to bring the whole thing down." A breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Mercer Global Logistics executive detained for questioning. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. "They detained him," she whispered. Jonah didn't celebrate. He leaned back slowly, eyes narrowed. They detained a piece of him. As if summoned by the thought, Jonah's laptop chimed sharply. Incoming secure message. He opened it. A single line appeared. "You think this is over?" Claire stiffened. "That's him." Jonah typed back calmly. "It is. You just don't see it yet." The reply came faster this time. "You always did underestimate how many levers I have." Jonah closed the laptop. "Then he's desperate," Claire said. "Yes, and desperate men make mistakes." Outside the warehouse, sirens wailed closer now, not for them, but for the city waking up to the damage Mercer's operation had done. The illusion of control was gone. Every move Mercer made now was reactive, visible, traceable. Claire's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a threat. It was a message from an investigative journalist she trusted. "Your data matches independent intel. We're publishing everything, no redactions." Claire's knees weakened slightly. She sat down hard on the crate. "It's done," she whispered, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with the release of weeks of pressure. "They can't put this back." Jonah watched her carefully. "They'll try something final." She looked up. "What kind of final?" Jonah's expression darkened. "The kind that doesn't care about exposure." A distant thump echoed through the warehouse district, not close enough to be immediate, close enough to be intentional. Jonah stood instantly. "We're leaving," he said. "Where?" Claire asked. "Somewhere public, somewhere Mercer can't bury what happens next." As they moved, Jonah glanced back once at the laptop still glowing on the crate, feeds scrolling, names falling, structures collapsing. Mercer had spent decades turning chaos into profit. Now chaos was coming for him, and it didn't need Jonah's permission anymore. The city didn't explode, it exhaled. By the time the sun dipped low enough to stain the skyline orange, Elliot Mercer was no longer a shadow. His name scrolled calmly across news tickers. His companies were frozen mid-transaction. His allies spoke through lawyers instead of intermediaries. The machinery that once moved invisibly had stalled in public view. Jonah and Claire stood on a pedestrian overpass overlooking the harbor. Traffic flowed beneath them, ordinary and oblivious the way it always did after history quietly shifted direction. "They won't forget your name," Jonah said. Claire shook her head. "That's fine. I'm not hiding anymore." She looked tired, but lighter, the kind of tired that came from finishing something that mattered. "They offered protection, witness placement, new identity." Jonah nodded. "And?" She said no, not yet. A pause. "You staying?" he asked. "For a while," she replied. "Someone has to testify. Someone has to make sure this doesn't get buried under the next crisis." Jonah leaned on the railing, watching boats move slowly through the water. "That's a dangerous kind of staying," Claire smiled faintly. "I've noticed." They stood in silence for a moment longer. No sirens, no footsteps behind them, no engines idling where they shouldn't be. Just wind, water, normal life resuming. Jonah finally spoke. "When this is truly done, I'm going back off-grid." Claire nodded, unsurprised. "I figured." She hesitated, then said, "You don't have to disappear the same way anymore." Jonah looked at her, really looked at her. "I don't know any other way." Claire stepped closer, not touching, just close enough to be felt. "Then learn," she said. "You're good at that." Jonah almost laughed. Instead, he exhaled slowly. "You knocked on the wrong door," she smiled, "or the only one that opened." They parted without ceremony. No promises spoken aloud, no dramatic goodbyes, just a shared understanding that some connections didn't need closure to be real. As Claire walked toward the city lights, Jonah turned the other way, heading back toward the quiet edges of the world. The hunt was over, the truth was out, and for the first time in a long while, both of them chose what came next.